Welcome to Full Prefrontal, the show that exposes the mysteries of executive functions. This show is a collection of conversations about the role of the prefrontal cortex, which impacts your focus, planning, problem-solving, emotional balance, and independence. These conversations will introduce mental tools that will empower you to shift your mindset for a successful life. And now, here's your host, Sucheta Kamath.
Welcome back to Full Prefrontal, where we're exposing the mysteries of executive functions. I am here with our host, Sucheta Kamath. Good morning, Sucheta. Always good to spend some time with you. However, I'm very curious because if I understand correctly, today you're going to talk to us about feeding kids dog food. What do you mean by that?
Yes, well, before I start talking about feeding children dog food and how does that relate to executive function, I wanted to share a quick thing about a brand new puppy that we have. We have a puppy who is barely a month old. He's absolutely adorable, but he's a puppy. So he needs to be taken out 3-4 hours, every 3-4 hours. And just this morning, I brought him outside, stayed on my phone while he ran around, and I immediately brought him in only to witness him, pee on our carpet. So what happened there, I did take him out, but did not watch him carefully. Just toyed around on some apps mindlessly while I was supposed to be supervising him. So I know when I tell you the story, I'm not alone. So we are all in a rush. We are either late or scrambling to keep up with all that we need to do. And we sometimes are even trying to stay ahead in everyday management. But the flip side is that being overstimulation for hungry, and we can quickly get bored and we can even get sucked into mindless actions. And that's where this story about feeding the kids dog food comes from. So here's an interesting story, Todd. Recently, Wananui preschool in New Zealand circulated a notice to its staff to check their pre-K and kindergarten lunch boxes for individually packed snack treats shaped like dog bone, to make sure that the kids were not eating them. So what happened? What was the big hoopla about? Apparently, many parents looking to buy snacks for their youngsters went to the local supermarket. Apparently, the supermarket closest to the school, and picked up these boxes, which featured kids' favorite Scooby-Doo character. And later, Antoinette Laird, the head of external relationship for the Food Stop New Zealand, was left to manage the PR nightmare. She admitted that the cartoon character on the box that had individually wrapped treats was to be blamed. And of course, the boxes were placed not in the pet section, but they were in the featured item for the week kind of section. And it was placed next to other multi-packages such as chips in the supermarket, which did make the issue complicated. But there was one truth here, that no one really took the time and inspected the packet closely or read the label. The label clearly said pet treats and not intended for human consumption. So why I'm talking about all this, that those who raise and educate children have to behave like the conductor of a symphony orchestra. We need to choreograph behaviors and attitudes of the children while keeping an eye on many moving parts, including buying treats or snacks for our children, treats for the dogs and snacks for the children. We're orchestrating. And so the big question when it comes to managing executive function is what goes into orchestrating success. So teachers and parents are trying hard to strike a delicate balance between supervising the transition and pushing those who lag behind while slowing down those who are rushing. As you heard me describe, well-meaning parents can accidentally feed their precious children dog treat. Paying attention, being careful or watchful, avoiding faux pas requires great amount of investment of time and careful scrutiny. Through my practice of 20 years, my conversations with experts, I have concluded that managing executive dysfunction requires even greater mastery and investment in careful scrutiny and diligent attention to time. So my guest today makes a case as to how we can promote development of executive function via process-specific training, particularly through self-reflection that's done in service of goal-directedness. So it's a great pleasure of mine to introduce Dr. Lynn Meltzer. This is her second show that she will be doing for us. She comes from Massachusetts, my first home away from home. She's the president and director of research and the director of assessment of the Research Institute for Learning and Development in Lexington. She is a fellow and past president of the prestigious International Academy for Research in Learning Disabilities. Her 35 years of assessment and clinical consultation with children, adolescents, and adults have emphasized the critical importance of the theory to practice cycle of knowledge. Dr. Meltzer is the founder and chair of the National Learning Differences Conference, which is now in its 32nd year run at Harvard School of Education. She's, of course, served as, in an editorial position in a number of prestigious journals. Her recent work, together with her research ILD colleagues, includes books for professionals as well as parents. And she has created 2 award-winning interactive softwares, Brain Cogs and Essay Express. Lynn is one of my favorite researchers because of her emphasis on practical application of strategy-centered training of executive function. So it is with great pleasure, I am inviting Lynn to join us.
Well, Sucheta, I chuckled at your story about what happened to your puppy this morning. I've been there myself, as have most people listening, and it's now official Todd policy that I do not bring my phone with me when I walk the dog for that very reason, because if I had $1 for every time I would turn to my wife and say, well, wait a minute, did Shiloh go potty yet or not? I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. So we don't bring our phones anymore. So as you said, this promises to be a second great conversation with Dr. Meltzer. I'm looking forward to it. Let's get right to it. So here's Sucheta and her second conversation with Dr. Lynn Meltzer.
Welcome to the podcast, Lynn. It's such a delight to have you. For those who have not had a chance to listen to Lynn's previous interview, please do so. We have it on our website. So as I get into more discussion about how to manage executive functions, can you briefly just, in a short way, describe to our listeners what are executive functions?
Sure. Basically, when we talk about executive function, we talk about the ability to access a number of core processes in order to organize and synthesize information. And the core processes that we emphasize are goal setting, cognitive flexibility, or the ability to shift, basically when problem solving or when approaching different tasks, and thinking flexibly. The third area that we emphasize with executive function is organizing and prioritizing. And the fourth is working memory, and the fifth is self-monitoring. And with all of those processes, we also see a foundation being metacognitive awareness, which is students' ability to think, individuals' ability to think about how they think and to learn about how to learn. So it's their self-understanding about their strengths and weaknesses and how they can approach their academic work, their after-school activities, and life in general.
Got it. Beautiful. So can we now talk about managing and treating executive function difficulties? But because of the limited time we have, instead of talking about all areas of executive processes that you just described, can we get into talking about metacognitive awareness, cognitive flexibility, and self-monitoring? How do you propose we manage them?
Sure. Please do ask those questions. So let's talk about metacognitive awareness, my 2 favorite topics, metacognitive awareness and cognitive flexibility.
Mine too.
So as I said, metacognitive awareness really refers to students' ability to understand their strengths and weaknesses, and as well as how they think, and in the academic situation, how they learn. So the ways to promote this, and I think there's some really easy activities that teachers can incorporate into their classrooms that promote metacognitive awareness. The most important is that they build what I call a cultural strategies in the classrooms. So they help their students to understand their learning profiles, as well as the importance of using these strategies in their academic work. And part of that is to teach students explicitly what strategies are, why they should use their strategies, and which strategies are effective to which task. Because as we know, every strategy doesn't work for every student all of the time for all tasks. It has to be individualized. Students have to really use specific strategies, tailor them to their own strengths and weaknesses. So in all of our clinical and research work at our Institutes for Learning and Development, as well as in our Smarts Online curriculum, we always emphasize a few very practical techniques that teachers can easily implement in their classrooms, and that we feel make a huge impact on children's metacognitive awareness and self-understanding. And by the way, all our work is evidence-based. We do have we've been involved with research in these executive function processes for, for a few decades, and particularly the last 7 or 8 years. And so we have found that these really do have an impact on students' learning. So let me talk about just 3 aspects of metacognitive awareness. The first system that teachers can use is something very easy. It's part of what we call the Metacog survey system. This is a series of questionnaires that we've developed for students in late elementary school through high school. It's brief, it's teacher-friendly, it's easy to use, and it's a criterion-referenced assessment system. So it's a series of brief questionnaires that students complete, teachers complete, parents complete, and for sections of this questionnaire, they're identical questions. So
these are students' evaluation of themselves and the teacher's evaluation of students and parents' evaluation of the student.
Correct? Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so there's an easy frame of reference that teachers can use to say, oh, well, I view the student as not very invested in learning and not very motivated. Unfortunately, teachers use those terms too often. Whereas the student is viewing himself as like the hardest worker in the class and saying, I'm working for hours and hours because the issue is they don't have the strategies to approach their work. So there's this disconnect. Or maybe the teachers and the students view themselves very similarly. So you can see those similarities. But most importantly, when students complete these questionnaires, these inventories at the beginning of the year and at the end, and sometimes some teachers use them in the middle too, they begin to ask questions about themselves in terms of how they learn. And this really helps them to begin to understand what their strengths and weaknesses are. And the questions relate these executive function strategies to the academic areas, reading, written language, spelling, math. So as we see it, this helps to build the self-understanding, which is the foundation for building their improved academic performance. So that's the one thing we encourage teachers to use. And by the way, at the end of this questionnaire, there are 3 open-ended qualitative questions. The one is for students to say, how do you view yourself as a student? And then we ask them to write down how they think their parents would describe them as students and how their teachers would describe them as students.
It's a nice way to get them to see perspectives.
Yeah, exactly.
Activate the perspective of somebody else.
Correct. And that's also actually requiring flexibility, right? So they have to shift into other people's perspectives. That's it. And then comparing that to what the teachers have actually said to see whether it's similarly aligned or not. Then the second thing so those are the Metacog surveys. And by the way, those are available through our website. People can go on our Research LD website and can.
Is this something they can purchase, or is it for free?
Yes.
They can purchase.
Yes, it's a very low cost, but it is available.
We will link that to our website as well.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
So the second one is what we call Know Yourself Venn diagrams. And these are very simple Venn diagrams that students can, we train teachers to give these to students, and basically it's an easy to use structure for encouraging students to think about and diagram their strengths and weaknesses. So they begin to understand their learning profiles and to recognize which strategies work best for them. And these Venn diagrams help students to make their learning profiles explicit so that they recognize and embrace their strengths and understand that their weaknesses aren't, all-encompassing. And these Venn diagrams are available on our these are in our SMART executive function curriculum, which we can talk about in a few minutes.
So young can students start identifying his own skills and abilities and be fairly insightful?
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, we often think that young kids can't do this, but we actually use these with our 6-year-olds, with our first graders when we, in many instances, obviously it's going to be much more basic, and some of these younger kids are going to say, and obviously they're going to say, well, I'm good at soccer, and I'm not so good at music or something like, etc.
Yes.
Or, I really am not good at reading. But the point is to use these to build that self-understanding, and then to use this to point out, well, you're good at much more. Your strength, you have many more strengths than you think, and to try and build that self-understanding over time.
And kind of give them a lens to take an inward look at self from a perspective of a learner and a thinker, which is an amazing, you're doing a cognitive nudge, so to speak.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I love that terminology using.
So one more question regarding this metacognitive awareness. You are using this awareness as a bedrock of making them strategy-oriented thinkers. So if you don't know about this about you, why would you change this about you, correct?
Correct, yes.
Got it.
So they have to understand it in order to then recognize, in order to then buy into the concept of I've got to use strategies and I've got to do something differently.
Got it.
So that's the Know Yourself in diagrams. And then the third thing we use are what we call strategy reflection sheets. So this is for teachers to use in the classroom. So these are just like very, it's a half page where kids can just write a few sentences and require students to reflect on and describe the processes and strategies they're using for their classwork or their homework or how they're preparing for tests. So we start off with a multiple choice format where, say, if a teacher teaches specific strategies, they have like these 4 strategies. When you do your homework, just check off what you've used. And then we move to a structured questions and then to open-ended format and ask students to explain what the approach they've used to learn, to remember information, to complete their written work, to check their work. So when students are required to complete these strategy reflection sheets, they're being forced to, that's thinking about how you think, right? And thinking about how you learn. That's metacognitive awareness. And the issue is when teachers require that, and unfortunately these days, there has to be an incentive or kids won't use it. And incentives are not ones that I think are necessarily the ones which are grades in school. But if teachers then provide incentives such as bonus points or grades for using strategy or reflection sheets, this makes a huge difference. So in other words, I'm not just what the teacher's saying to a kid is, I'm not just interested in your completing the homework for the homework's sake. I want you to be thinking about how you're doing this, and you are going to get credit for that part of the process. This is not just about content or end. It's not just about the end product. It's about the process. So when teachers do that, then there's a value placed on it, and students begin to value that. In some of the schools we've worked with over the past few years, we've also collected data. So these are where some of our research has been based. One of the principals in one of our schools reorganized the whole report card system to include ratings of these processes, and the whole school sort of and the entire school really has the teachers and the students really reflecting about how they approach tests. It makes a huge difference. And the other piece that we often recommend to teachers, and it doesn't take much time, is to have daily or weekly strategy shares, where students come in and selected students will discuss the strategies they've used. They can either discuss them as a group or with one another, and that's where some peer coaching comes into place, or what we call executive coaching teams, which support one another. So there's a culture of strategy use in each classroom. Because when kids encourage each other to use strategies, it becomes part of who they are. And so it's cool rather than, I just have to use that in my learning center class. I'm not interested in doing it.
And it's not punitive if it comes from teacher. It's only because there's a problem. Yeah, and you're also encouraging, sounds like a culture of taking responsibility for your learning by engaging in how to, not just what of it.
Exactly.
Which is terrific.
Yeah.
So when you say, is this a common practice in education or is this unique to your approach, introducing metacognitive awareness and flexibility and self-monitoring processes?
I'm not sure I can answer that question broadly. I know that this is what we are asked to talk about and to teach a lot in schools. I don't see it as sort of a general practice. But what's very interesting is as we get requests from teachers and from schools, and actually requests for our SMARTS curriculum, because the teachers, it's very explicit. There are lessons in there for teaching this metacognitive awareness. Teachers saying we need to start. This is really important. We need to start helping our students to understand this. A big part of metacognitive awareness is we also have some activities that we work on with teachers to help them understand how their teaching styles
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Their ways of teaching, so that they recognize that every student in their class doesn't learn the way the teacher learns. And that, that's the issue of differentiating instruction. So we're getting more and more teachers who are seeing that as a critical part of the what they need to learn about. And so those are the people who approach us for our smarts, who want to subscribe or ask us to come into schools to do trainings about these executive function processes.
Could you, Lynn, share with our listeners your SMARTS program? What is it and how does it work?
Yes, thanks. I'd love to. So you can see my enthusiasm.
I love the program. I've read a lot about it. So yes.
Thank you. Well, SMARTS is actually an acronym for strategies, motivation, awareness, resilience, talents, and success. And each of these strands is a core component of this program. So although every single one of these is not yet online, just so you know. So our SMARTS program is anchored in the theoretical paradigm that we've referred to that emphasizes these executive function processes, and also in a theoretical paradigm that promotes the key processes that we see as the underpinnings for resilience and for success, namely this metacognitive awareness that we've just been talking about, the executive function strategies we've been talking about, persistence as well, and academic self-concept. So we developed our SMARTS executive function and mentoring program to help teachers implement these strategies in the classroom in the most practical, efficient, and effective manner possible. And our SMARTS online story really began about 9 years ago when we were involved in a community SMARTS program, which we developed at our clinical institute here in Lexington, Massachusetts. And our vision was to create an evidence-based program that could help all students in the schools, in particular students with learning and attention challenges, with the focus being on helping them to succeed in school and in life. We pilot tested and evaluated the efficacy of SMARTS in 5 underserved schools in Boston over a period of 5 years. And then 5 years ago, we turned our vision into reality, and we began to formalize the SMARTS executive function curriculum as an online program for teachers and students. We had generous funding from the Oak Foundation to develop this. And so we developed this basically extensive it's literally a 1 to 2 year curriculum, depending on how teachers want to use it. And we beta tested it.
Is it optional or is it kind of mandatory? Does the whole school adopt it or teacher by teacher does it?
Teacher by teacher. You can have one teacher. We have schools. We have single teachers. We have certain grades in a school, and also it's very flexible. So in other words, teachers can choose one unit or one set of lessons. Like they can say, I just want to teach metacognitive awareness and I want to focus on these aspects, or I want to teach this aspect of reading. I want to teach kids to shift flexibly in reading. The focus of this is to teach these executive function strategies in the context of academic work, because we feel like very strongly, and the data shows that you really need to relate it to academics, to the academic
context,
performance areas. Yeah, reading, written language, spelling, math, science, social studies. So we beta tested it in SMARTS in 9 leadership schools across the country, and then we launched it online about a year ago, and it's now being used with hundreds of subscribers across the country, and it's being used in 9 different countries, which we're excited about.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so our year-long SMARTS curriculum consists of 30 lesson plans, but you could consider those as multiple lessons, because it's really a lesson plan theoretically is close to an hour. So it could be divided up into 4 mini lessons or 2 mini lessons, however teachers want to split it. Then there are also PowerPoint presentations for every lesson. There are hundreds of handouts and worksheets to give to students, and there are also training videos. And as I said, all the materials are designed to be scaffolded into language, arts, science, history. The focus, by the way, for what's online now is for middle and high school. Although a lot of elementary school teachers are using it, especially 4th and 5th grade, and they're just adjusting slightly. And then our goal is over this next year, we are working on an elementary school version, which we're hoping to move out, but not immediately. So the lesson plans then, as I said, focus on embedding teaching of executive function strategies into the curriculum systematically. And we really emphasize metacognition and cognitive flexibility in this. Just very briefly, we have also evaluated this in different formats in different schools. In our most recent SMART study, with 6th and 7th grade teachers were trained to use it, the SMART curriculum, and to teach these strategies to about 200 general and special ed students. And then there was a control group of teachers who continued to provide the business as usual curriculum to the control students of 200 students. Obviously we had an intervention group who received SMARTs and then a control group. And compared to the students who didn't receive SMARTs, the students who were in special education and general education in the SMARTS program used significantly more executive function strategies in their classwork. They were more flexible. They worked harder when they completed classwork and homework, and they had higher levels of self-understanding. And they were also more resilient and optimistic in their approach to there's so many challenges that they face on a daily basis. So our findings have been really positive and robust.
So as we conclude our podcast, Lynn, can you take a minute to quickly comment on, since executive function challenges continue to emerge and they present themselves in different ways, what can parents do to help their children?
Yes, thanks for asking me a question. And obviously, it's a question that can take up, in about 20 minutes. I'm going to just mention a few highlights very briefly. But I think first I'd like to mention sort of what signs parents, how they know that, what should trigger them to the fact that their kids might be having some of these executive function struggles. And some of the issues that they should be aware of when their kids have regular meltdowns during homework time, when they avoid written assignments, despite they might be very strong orally, but as soon as they have a written paper to do, they avoid it at all costs. They have frequent temper tantrums at home as soon as homework when they have to start their homework. They procrastinate and leave last-minute projects till the last minute. And they do well on multiple choice tests, but they struggle with open-ended tests, which is often a trigger. And then most importantly, these are the parents who often come to us for neuropsych evaluations in our clinic. The trigger for them is that they're being told by the school that the children are doing really well. But suddenly they do terribly on one of the standardized tests that they have to complete. And there's a disconnect between that and their grades in school. So those are often sort of the warning signs that there's something going on probably in these executive function areas. So how do parents, to answer your question more directly, how do parents really help their children? Let me just touch on one or two very brief, because of lack of time, very brief things that can be done in each of these areas that we talked about. So first of all, goal setting. Well, that can help the children to break goals down into smaller steps and talk about alternative approaches. As we said, taking a goal like I really want to get an A in math, and breaking it down to, well, that means you have to sort of, you have a math test this week. Let's schedule. Make sure you schedule enough time to study for this, to practice some math math worksheets, so you do well on that. Or similarly with reading or writing. That's goal setting, shifting and thinking flexibly, which is the second executive function process. From the very earliest grades, parents really should expose their children to books like Amelia Bedelia, which they often do in preschool, because that's teaching kids to shift flexibly with language use and to really discuss it. Now, the interesting thing is Amelia Bedelia often stops. As soon as kids get into serious school in first grade, you can't use anything like that. And jokes and riddles and puns are suddenly not part of the daily activity.
Formal curriculum.
Yeah. Parents can really help kids to understand, to think flexibly in language use if they actually spend some time, discussing the different meanings in jokes or riddles. And similarly with math, when the kids have math homework, helping them to estimate and to compare the answers to word problems. So teaching that means you're shifting from the big idea to the details. Most importantly, using graphic organizers. We have something in our SMARTS program which we call SMARTS Triple Note Tote, which is a 3-column note-taking system that we hope teachers will teach, but parents can encourage their kids to use these kinds of systems, because the major difference with our strategy is that the last column, so the main column, the one column is core concepts, the second one is for details, and most importantly, the third column is what strategy are you going to use to remember or recall or retain this information. So kids can use this for quizzing themselves and for planning and outlining, note-taking, for writing, for reading, for everything. The next area is organizing and prioritizing. So how parents can encourage their children to use, as I said, 2 or 3 column note-taking systems, graphic organizers, and organizing their materials, which is often such a challenge, getting their children to have a system for organizing their backpacks, organizing their folders, filing their old test and study guides, which kids avoid at all costs, but parents just having a regular time once a week on a Friday afternoon before you start the weekend, this is what you need to do. And if parents start this early, it becomes a habit. It's really hard to impose on kids when they're in high school. And we've talked about goal setting, shifting or thinking flexibly, organizing ideas and materials, and then prioritizing, having children divide and conquer upcoming assignments and projects by planning to complete larger assignments in steps. The working memory piece, parents can encourage their children to develop their own strategies, like acronyms, or use cartoons to remember difficult information, so that they have to hold less in working memory, and creating songs and stories. And then finally, the self-monitoring or checking that kids need to develop their own personalized checklist to correct the most common mistakes in, when they write. So if the most common mistake is their spelling errors and tenses, that they have those listed on checklists. So these are all variations of the strategies that we have in our core Smarts curriculum, our online Smarts curriculum that we have moved out for teachers, but parents can really use variations of these strategies.
So what you're saying is the parents should become more engaged parents, and kind of really understand what is the nature of their child's executive function difficulties, and tailor the support that they provide, but more specific in terms of academic support, not just encouragement, which is great, but not enough.
Yes. Well, I would say yes and no. The most important thing is that we don't want parents to become their children's tutors, because obviously that's really gets to when there's a lot of emotion attached to parent, to that.
Yes.
But if parents understand what these issues are, and just, things like jokes and riddles, parents are always doing activities in the car when they're driving. Those kinds of activities, happen in the car. When parents are getting their kids to sit down to homework, it's like saying, have you got a schedule? Have you figured out how you're going to plan your time? For, breaking up today's homework time into, you've got 3 hours now, chart it out, and add in the time that you're going to be sitting on your cell phone or texting, as breaks. So charting it out, organizing their materials, and then encouraging them so that, to use strategies that work with their learning styles. So not teaching them specifically, but giving them the supports and the structure to use these executive function strategies in relation to their homework.
Got it. Well,
So,
Lynn, it has
question.
been. Well, it's as I will mention again this to our listeners, that I can have a conversation with Lynn for hours and gather so much wealth of knowledge and information for our listeners. But Lynn, you have been terrific, and what you have shared today is a great glimpse into the complexity. But you have given us a great message of hope, and I hope particularly parents in the audience and teachers will find great inspiration in that. As I close our interview, if people want to reach you, what's the best way they can reach you? And we will make sure that we will also connect the resources that you're going to mention. But how can they get in touch with you?
Well, thank you. And thank you, Sushita, for making this happen. Really appreciate this and enjoy. And I also enjoy talking with you a lot. So, in terms of connecting with us, We have 3 websites. Our main Research LD website is probably the best place to go. It's www.researchild.org. Then if people are particularly interested in our SMART curriculum, and there's a lot of free resources on that website as well, it's www.smart-ef, which stands for executive function.org. So www.smart-ef.org. And then if people are interested more in our clinical services, our neuropsych evaluations, our educational therapy, and work with parents, it's www.ildlex.org. It will be consolidated under one website address in the future, but currently it's sort of those 3 addresses.
Got it.
So thank you again.
Oh, thank you. And I really look forward to listeners enjoying this conversation and hearing from them. And once again, we are so honored to have you on the show and grateful for your wisdom. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It was my pleasure.
All right. Once again, that was Dr. Lynn Meltzer. What a great conversation, Sucheta. 2 great conversations with Dr. Meltzer. Eddie, gosh, any immediate thoughts here?
Yeah, I just love the way Lynn brings so much to the table and helps us peel these layers back to understand executive function at a more deeper level. For me, the first takeaway is these 3 core principles that are at the heart of managing executive function. The first thing is that we need to help students understand their own learning profile. They need to be coached and taught. And that's where, she describes all these tools that she has developed, metacognitive survey, mapping, helping students map their own self-knowledge using Venn diagrams, taking that learning profile and making it more explicit. She talks about these strategy reflection sheets. So she's done a lot of work, and that really, really helps. The second thing is that the educators must show how strategies work, not just hope that the students will use them somehow through osmosis or something. In other words, teaching schoolwork should include teaching learning strategies, and that should not be taught at the Learning Resource Center, or that should not be recommended in passing. That should not be something that's not graded. That's at least my personal work. In the curriculum that I have developed to organize your brain at school, I recommend that the strategy should be graded for a specific way so that the effort that goes into learning should be accounted for, not just the content that was learned. And finally, the third thing she emphasizes was that when educators explain why of the strategy, the students will use them more often. So this, of course, makes logical sense that when we understand a rationale about why we need to do what we are doing, we are likely to be more invested in it. So the why says the importance of the strategy and helps the student to go into the depth of the matter. And so these 3 principles, if every educator takes to their heart and the classrooms are structured around it, I think that's a great beginning for 21st century readiness.
Well, what I really like and what frankly gives me a lot of hope is that every guest on your show, including Dr. Meltzer, talks about how trainable executive function skills are.
Yeah, I think the key, as you mentioned, is the trainability of these skills. These are not hardwired skills, or they're not like vision. They don't get turned on when you open your eyes and they turn off when you close your eyes. They are actually skills that progressively get better. And if we can teach somebody to play piano, and recently I saw a documentary where a blind man, uses echolocation to teach himself to ride a bike through like a path, not like on an open arena. He can navigate using echolocation while he's riding his bike. I mean, if these skills can be taught, human resilience kicks in to learn anything explicitly when teaching is facilitated that way.
What Lynn talks about is that she wants educators to train executive functions in the classroom. I mean, so Cheda, based on your work and looking through your expert lens, I have to imagine that really does benefit kids, but also it benefits teachers too, right?
Exactly. And that's the third takeaway here, that as educators and parents think about successfully dealing with executive function challenges, they need to remember that executive function can be taught, but that needs to become fabric of the classroom experience, not this laid upon, not this extraneous thing that, yeah, when you're doing your homework, why don't you find a quiet place? It can be something outside of the learning experience. Teaching these skills, however, is not easy. There are very few research methods that exist that have been proven effective. That's why somebody like Lynn plays an important role in translating a well-researched methodological approaches into effective classroom implementation. And that's what her SMARTS curriculum actually is all about. She has developed this very well thought out, extensive program, which is research based, and it incorporates the online executive function and mentoring training. Some of the special features that she identified, and I have also investigated, it has 30 lesson plans for a year-long curriculum, and they collectively focus on executive processes that needs to be taught explicitly and systematically. And they are, again, as I mentioned, they are woven into classroom activities. So, for example, if the history teacher is going to discuss a war and she wants the students to kind of analyze what were the factors that led to the war, what were the consequences of the war, what were the long-term consequences, you can incorporate templates of organizing information using executive process while discussing complex topic of history, but you can do the same when you're discussing calculus. So there's that generalization ability when you have a systematic approach like that.
So, Cheda, parents have to play an important role here, yes?
Yes, of course. Lynn took the time to explain that extensively, but it's really, she wants us to remember that the parents and teachers need to collaborate. It's a joint effort. And that's the next takeaway, that Lynn reminds us that parents certainly need to get good at recognizing the executive function struggles. So there are some signs that she described. For example, the child is either procrastinating doing his work. He's sometimes completely avoiding his assignments. Homework time is it's a big ordeal in the house, particularly if there are many children and only one child struggles with it. This child seems to take over. The kid is throwing a frequent temper tantrums even. And basically what it's telling us is that the child is easily overwhelmed by the number of assignments and the scope of assignments. In my observations, here are some additional signs of struggle that parents need to become very aware, and that can help. So one of the roles they play is to become very vigilant in noticing these signs and not chalk them off as something, a casual problem that every child faces. So, for example, daydreaming while doing the work, obsessing about the work either by thinking too much about it or not getting started about it, but worrying about it. Constantly bringing incomplete work. That's another great sign of executive function problem. Being less disciplined and more reluctant to responding to structure that's imposed by parents. So these are the signs that parents can begin to recognize.
All right. So if we're saying that parents play an important role, I'm sure they would appreciate some advice and some tips to help them manage this.
Yeah. So Lynn kind of went over what parents can do. They can help their children write the goals down. They can discuss the approaches, alternative approaches with their children, help the children break the task down. Now, this does begin to resemble home tutoring or reteaching the content, then it's not being done right. But there is definite a responsibility that parents have towards breaking down the process, just the way we are asking teachers to do. I feel other things that she mentioned that were not academic, that exposing the kids to things and skills that develop flexibility, processing jokes or discussing riddles or reading out puns. Those can be fun exercises, but they actually are kind of coaching and finessing that brain, that part of the brain that supports executive process. Using graphic organizers when kind of, and these are now readily available if you Google graphic organizer for writing. So kind of getting the kids set up to do that preliminary step before writing a essay or one-page paper, or even, kids as young as first graders who struggle with what do I do when I have to write what happened this weekend? They're supposed to write 5 sentences. That can be extremely arduous for kids who struggle with executive function. So she is very clear about talking about dividing and conquering projects, helping their kids at home to break things down. And more importantly, not just developing systems, but checking if the systems are working. If I can summarize the entire experience of executive function training and, use Lynn's discussion with Lynn as a point of reference, I will say that well-crafted learning experience can be facilitated. The most crucial developmental and aspect of it is it helps achieve self-discovery, and it should not be left for chance. Parents and teachers need to encourage their children as they explore their learning environment before they settle down and eventually decide the right approach that works for them. Good classroom teachers are the catalyst who make sure that the children are fully engaged in the classroom. And parents play a big role. Our mothers and fathers are the ones who support our interest, and they help us pursue these interests through activities that happen in the house. So if you ask me, simple things as taking your children to the zoo or taking them to the museum, buying toys that promote exploration and problem solving, including science toys or microscopes and chemistry sets can be very, very helpful. We need to really remember basics of parenting and basics of high expectations serve children well. Kids tend to live up or down the expectation ladder, but we are in charge of setting up that dial. We support children's learning by the way we support them outside the learning context. Though children need to be taught how to help around the house, they need to be asked how to cooperate in the house. And so all these things together to me are really what brings executive function learning as a natural and organic process as living a fulfilling life.
An awful lot to think about from both of your conversations with Dr. Meltzer. So appreciate those two very, very critically important conversations. It's all the time we have for today. Again, on behalf of our host, Sucheta Kamath, and all of us at Cerebral Matters, thank you for tuning in today, and we look forward to seeing you next week on Full Prefrontal.
Thank you for listening to Full Prefrontal, exposing the mysteries of executive functions. To contact our host, Sucheta Kamath, and learn more about her work on improving executive functions, visit her website at cerebralmatters.com. That's cerebralmatters.com. Tune in next week for the next informative episode of Full Prefrontal.